Welcome back, fellow armchair generals. This is Gamer1745 here with my continuing playthrough of, yes, you got it, Hearts of Iron 3 with Black Ice 9.11. And of course, we're playing as Japan. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button. I'd love to see you around here more often. Only if you want them, though. Hit that bell, ring the bell to get notifications. Sometimes I do it on some channels, other channels I don't, because I want to watch the other channel, but I'm going to check it every few days, and that's all I really want to do, and don't need to know immediately every time they release a video. So just if you want that, and oh, of course, liking this video is a nice thing to do for me. Why are we here, but we don't control this province? Communist revolt broke out underneath it. Okay, that's right, at the end of last episode. So do we have any other communist revolty thingies? Nope, doesn't look like it. Okay, let's continue. Okay, Army HQs have advanced. Very good. We're going to let that continue, not that far ahead. And again, it brings down reduced time. Delay between attacks is reduced with 12 hours. Good. It's going to be once we get the next one. This one is 8 hours, so 4 hours. Less time between attacks is a wondrous thing. Okay, you come down here. Okay, now that you're here, support this attack. We give them money for some crude oil. Okay. Okay, you can support the attack as well. This nice, when I last checked this had, yeah, oh, time, oh, thought it was 75, but maybe something. Okay, great. So now we have that. So what we want to do is, don't think there's a big difference between these two units. So let's grab those two. And can we just move this over? Yes. We're going to leave that there. Okay, because since these are just modifiers here, you can see again, and not everyone watches every episode. Soft attack, a total of 1. Hard attack, 0. Anti-air just has anti-air capability, or figure some anti-air units around it. But what it has is massive modifiers. So these modifiers modify these other attacks. So if you really want to do this, you know, in sort of a really good specialized fortress. And I was just asked by an odd spelling of Kamikaze, one of the viewers who's watching currently the German series. I don't think he's watching this one. Asked me why I don't build Fortress Buster divisions specifically for Germany. And the straight up answer is they're unhistorical. Now, there were units like railway guns. Germany had them, specifically designed to attack. Initially, it was very much to attack the Maginot Line, but designed to attack fortifications, bombard cities. The original Paris gun, which was the German long-range gun in World War I, was specifically designed to bombard Paris. So they had them, and those are obviously, if you will, fortress buster units. But in the game terms, they really didn't have them. So what they are, and what is historical, is you get these guys, which has fort attack plus 50%. Do we have an urban attack here? Urban attack is plus 45%. And you can look, as part of the reason I'm using them here, you can look at engineers here, just straight up engineers, fortress 115, which are better. But notice I have both. This isn't a replacement. An urban just 45, so the same percentage. So this is not a replacement for, these aren't a replacement for these. These are additive. And we could look here. They have some, fort attack plus 17%, and urban attack plus 17%. So at least they're not bringing it down with a negative penalty. And plus they also have their own, we can look here, soft attack 6, hard attack 4 or 6.6 and 1.4. And here, let's look, I just don't even know, so we're looking, soft attack 2.46. So the other one, these guys are about roughly, vaguely, almost 3 times as much soft attack, and about the same, a little weaker on hard attack. So these guys here would go great added to this division. Heavier artillery would also be nice as well, and well, we can get rid of the transport easily enough because that's for the attack is unneeded. And so we can, and so we may once Nanjing is taken, which being their capital is either they've moved it to here already, okay, but it is a victory point city for 2 points only, but okay, but still, so it's an important city, and it is industrially important as well, so including armaments factory and steel and whatnot. So yeah, so we want to take that, and so that's important to take too. And of course it helps close another pocket, another thing. So we have multiple priorities here. But I am for sure not against the idea of combining units to optimize them for a fortress attack, and this may be totally unnecessary, but we're going to use it since we have the unit here. And we can see here that even with that unit, we are at a negative. Now we can, once this fight's done, at least the units that are supporting the attack, they can turn around and fight in here. But to use these specialized things, it would be better to shift one to here to optimize it. I think these guys can join in too. Now we're attacking from 2 provinces. And those are just military police and headquarters, so we don't need to move them up. Looks like we've won the Battle of Nanjing. We'll hang here for a little bit before attacking, because I don't know if we'll occupy it before they can. Send in reinforcements. Okay, you guys, you join this fight, continue to crush them. Can crush this pocket. Hopefully these are all dying and not just shattering and going back to their capital. No, stop. Be defensive here. Yeah. Okay, I think you guys actually need to go offensive to support this guy. Yeah, see? Okay, recon unit combined arms. Yep, we're gonna let this continue. Attack movement rate up by 15%, recon plus 6%, we like that. And something else looks like, or maybe we're capturing, yep, probably getting Nanjing. And has given us more leadership overall, which will give us more boosts here. I think I would rather do that. I do have a couple of mountain divisions in production. Okay. Now, keeping to what? Let's move these Marines to here. Well, looking at speed, they'll move faster by themselves, so. Which may not be the best option, but we may attach them to that thing, and maybe I should have waited, but I didn't know how quickly that was going to happen, and they may not even be needed to create a fortress attacking unit. Okay, well, this is all one province. I thought there was a break there. Okay, yeah, attack. Support the attack. I think you guys can start moving there, because I think they've got this. And yes, we're pounding that. We're going to push in here hopefully soon. We've got this working out fairly well. I think they'll be able to retreat with what they want to retreat with. But we did get that good pocket up here. Now, it was mentioned, and we were talking about manpower, and how, before I talked about, and again, sorry, I'm forgetting who, I think Dark Star, sorry, but it could be somebody else, disagreed with me on the idea that these guys should have been fighting their way out earlier on and not trying to stay and defend this. That since they have large amounts of manpower or units to just sort of get in a good place, you know, a defended, fortified place here with whatnot, and fight it out, and, you know, delay, cost me manpower because I need replacements, cost me production time here for reinforcements and all of that stuff, and that this is a good strategy. And this is not what I'm talking about now, but sort of that China has lots of manpower. And it was brought up to me, of course I knew this, but I'm sort of thinking of it in a new light. News earlier today is that China and Japan, and of course the US as well, though it wasn't mentioned, didn't lose manpower like most of the European nations did in World War I. And so, of course, they have more manpower. And this is actually, quite honestly, sort of started a cascade in my mind. I was posted just a few hours before, so I haven't thought all of this through. And it's very much a reality. Now, lots of women during World War I and post-World War I got pregnant. that weren't married. It's something that isn't talked about a whole lot. It was, of course, something that is, or particularly then was highly frowned upon. But it was, like in World War II as well, much more accepted because it was, all kinds of different circumstances, including, oh, we're going to get married, so have sex with me before I go off to the front, and we'll get married when I get back, and oh, the guy dies. And there's some of that. But then there's other things. But I also believe that around this time, and in some places in France particularly, but I think in other places, a lot of women well post-war, get pregnant, and it's just not talked about a lot. And your father, we never did get married, but he died, and so he's not there. But he's actually living in the village, and the mother knows it, and a few other people may know it. It's just because the amount of men, they have a lack of men and no real social acceptance of polygamy. Doing okay here in Spain. The Republicans are actually quite well. We may see a Spanish Republic victory. So you do get a fair amount of replacements, because obviously you don't need a lot of men to replace the next generation. You need a lot of women as a biological thing. But still, even with that, and part of what I'm looking at is, to a large degree, because this is what I know of better than some of what's going on in the East, but it affects manpower losses in World War I affect Russia, but I think bigger is men, women, and children is the Russian Civil War. But then, as I'm sitting here thinking, you got the Holodomor in the Ukraine, which, massively depopulates that, and other sort of ongoing man-caused disasters, shall we say. And I don't necessarily mean the euphemistic term that was first used by Obama administrations for terrorists. Yes, we have man-caused disasters, as if they are as preventable as earthquakes or tornadoes or whatever, meaning you can't prevent them. And all you can do is mitigate against them, build, better buildings and whatnot. And that they're happening just because of the condition of the world, and we have no ability to affect the condition of the world enough to change the idea that there's man-caused disasters. That's sort of euphemistic they use. I'm meaning not so much here euphemistically over the Holodomor, which I believe was engineered, but just simply the inefficiencies of the Soviet system. Not a we're rounding up people in this village and shooting them because they didn't go along with the collective farming. No, they did go along with the collective farming, and they shouted off all of the right patriotic socialist slogans, and they went about it, and it failed, and they starved. Meaning, they tried for success, but it failed. These kind of man-caused disasters. And I'm just, as I'm saying all this, I'm recently someone was posting on Tumblr some photos and a bit of the story of Boris Yeltsin visiting the Houston Space Center, but sort of gets his driver team to stop at a supermarket, and he's just floored at what he sees in a supermarket, in a U.S. supermarket back in the U.S. at the time. He can't believe it, that these are for everybody. Anybody can walk in and buy them. Everybody has the money. This isn't just for the party bosses. He couldn't believe the efficiency. And then somebody, commenting on, yeah, so much of that food is thrown away, and whatever. So what if 90% of the food is thrown away? Who cares if the food is thrown away? We have plenty of food. Everybody in the world could have plenty of food if they just did the American way. Everybody in the world. could have plenty of food and grow so much food that they throw 90% of it away, and everybody would be the health problems would all be in the world related to being too fat. If they just did it the American way. Not come to America. Not suggesting you come to America. But the world could have no longer have any food problems if they just did it the American way. And that's perfectly true, because I 100% agree that if you were to, okay, not maybe drop people down in, completely arid desert or something, but drop it just about any halfway reasonable place, drop a large bunch of Americans and give them sort of the space and time, they're going to recreate America. It's just going to happen. They're just going to do it. There'll be some tough years, but they'll get there. So if you just did it the American way, now I know a lot of people don't like the American way. It's unequal. Yeah. You have equally starving as in Venezuela, or everybody equally starving, or we can all have more food than we can eat. And some people have better food than others, because there is no real practical reason for anybody to be starving in America. The main reason people don't have food in America is they're spending it on drugs. We're having a drug epidemic, because if you walk in, you can buy a package of 6 or 8 hot dogs in a grocery store for less than $2, and you can get old buns for approximately equal number of buns for less than $1. So yeah, you can eat in America food-wise. Maybe not the most healthy or balanced diet, but you can probably eat in America, and you can get the cheap hot dogs for less than $3 a day. And through various food stamps and other programs, you can I would be, that would pay for most of that. I would be shocked that you can, you could eat for about easily for under $5 a day. And if you look at the calories at like a McDonald's meal and spend that $5, you can get enough calories for a day in a single meal. I'm not saying I would just want to eat one meal, but yeah, and that's going to McDonald's. There is no reason for anybody to go starving hungry in America. Now, of course, you have other cost of living problems and concerns. I am in no way saying that there is no economic concerns in America for people, but the sheer basic sustenance of life is not a concern in America, and so we could have food around the world for everybody if they just did it the American way. They don't want to do it the American way, sometimes for good reasons, sometimes for bad reasons. And other ways where, I don't think there's anybody starving in Japan either, okay. So just that they're not doing it the American way, they're somewhat of an American way, but I don't think anybody's starving in Japan either, or I don't think there's anybody starving in Korea, and they're not doing it exactly the American way. But, you don't have to do it the American way. But if you do it the American way, not just pretend to or sort of say you are, but actually doing, there is no reason to starve. And some of it may be because they still haven't done it, partially because of the chaos of the situation. But why was there so much famine in Ethiopia and We Are the World? Well, they had to fly in food on big jet transports to get food to these starving people. Why did they have to do that? Because they didn't build any roads or build a port system in Mogadishu that could unload food faster than, one man at a time, getting a sack of food put on his back and, in chains getting off the ships. They didn't have good infrastructure when these countries had yet to fail. They didn't build infrastructure, so they didn't do it the American way. They didn't build the infrastructure. They did good enough for what they thought they needed. And then when disaster happens, and I'm not blaming them for the disaster happening, it happens, but they didn't have the ability to efficiently move in food without having to expensively fly it in an emergency situation. They couldn't just put it on a ship, take it off the ship, and efficiently put it on big trucks and deliver it, on a highway, driving 80 miles an hour on a highway. There is nowhere to drive a big truck at 80 miles an hour, I don't think, anywhere in this part of the world. Big truck full of food. You can get like a dune buggy or something driving that fast on it or whatever, but not a big truck weighted down with food. So yeah, criticize us for our waste, sure, but that isn't our fault that other parts of the world isn't doing better. And it's not our responsibility, America's or whoever's responsibility, to solve the mistakes of other people, especially when we come in and say, well, this is how we would solve them, and they go, oh, but this is not how we do it, whatever it is, because we're communist or we're traditionalists or whatever it may be. They refuse to listen to us. Okay, we're not responsible for doing it, and we can't solve other people's problems for them unless either one, they take our advice and start doing it our way, or we come in with guns and start, enforcing that on them. And people don't seem to like America showing up with guns. Could wonder why they don't. I don't, why don't you like America showing up with guns, more guns and guns and guns? But they don't seem to like it. You may say that seems silly, but that we should want to show up with guns and force people. Well, I'm not saying we want to, but if you want us to solve your problems, that's one way to solve your problems, is we show up with guns and force you to do it our way. But you don't seem to want to, and again, there may be good reasons, and I'm not saying you shouldn't resist, but if you resist us, which is fine, I'm not saying that, and trust me, I am not trying to convince the whole world to be America. I'm just saying, if you want to have grocery stores full of food, you would have it if you did it the American way. If you choose not to, fine. And again, there may be very strong cultural reasons. There may be other reasons, which, again, I put everything to culture. Why do you accept corrupt governments? Why does Nigeria accept such high levels of government corruption? Cultural. Because the government had been colonial, and to cheat the government was cheating the colonial empire, and that's just, at least that's the explanation I've heard. And so it's sort of the idea that people working and cheating money out of the government, you get away with what you can, and it's socially and culturally acceptable because they've sort of transferred the idea of this, because, and again, Nigeria is made up of multi-ethnic groups, I think more or less run by the Muslim north at the moment, because I think the capital is up here currently, even though Lagos is the biggest city. They should do a better image for Lagos even at this time than the jungle. Yeah, it's this time, but and so it's not, the different ethnic groups in here don't necessarily see the government as their government. I understand that, but so it's known for its corruption levels, and it's cultural, and there's cultural reasons for it, and I don't know how you would change it, because if you come in with the guns, now you're just cheating the guys who have the guns, so it's acceptable. Neocolonialism. I understand this kind of stuff, but because of these realistic facts, realistic conditions, we, the U.S., the West, whatever you want to call the we, cannot be responsible. Now, we can help. I've talked about this before. America, citizens and government helps a lot, but don't blame us for not solving the problem that there is excess food or whatever, and we're throwing it away because it shows up into the grocery store and it gets past its sell-by date, though it's still and there are programs in America and that go around and collect food that's past the sell-by date, but it's still perfectly healthy to eat, and collect it and then donate it to homeless shelters. There's all kinds of that. And I remember my grandfather talking, who owned a butcher shop, when the meat got sort of brown, often he was taking it home. My father ate very well meat-wise, but it was most always stuff that was getting, this was back before they had a lot of sell-by dates, and it was, a single-owned butcher shop. Stuff that's sort of, getting to like, well, okay, yeah, it's sort of getting brown. Doesn't look very appetizing on the store shelf, and somebody's going to say, yeah, I want the nice fresh red cut, that kind of thing. And even though it's very edible, so it was a lot of that kind of stuff, but it was still a fairly heavy meat diet. And that, but also that supporting his family with that kind of meat, whatever, because trust me, they owned the store, but they weren't rich. It was very much a owner-operated and mostly his own labor, and not anybody for the butcher's thing, not anybody else working in there. So he worked a lot, and profit margins were, I guess, okay, but not great. So that, but also he had, he was part of the community and would donate this, not bad, but getting to where it's not sellable, meat, to charities, or often to individuals that were hard up that he knew of in his community. He would donate a lot of that kind of stuff. So America's going to donate, and America's going to help, but America can't solve the problem. So don't blame America that we're throwing away too much food because we can't eat it all. It's just going to be the way it is. Now, getting back to the manpower thing, and what I'm starting to think, and because I've always been very, very aware of the National Socialist program to have more proper children, to explode the race, as it were. And I'm now seeing it even more in terms of World War I because of this, and I'm talking within the last 24 hours. That element of it, and and I'm going to be thinking on this a little bit more, because it doesn't show up in, not so much, a little bit in the idea that we need more bodies to fight in wars, most assuredly. But sort of in the manpower reactions, but sort of because of all of the losses in World War I, and seeing that it's partially a population thing. So seeing that Nazi reaction to World War I in the idea of needing to significantly increase the birth rate, I'm thinking more now, it's not just sort of, because in TRE, partially because of stuff that I sort of did, partially because of stuff that was given, events that were given to me that, yes, I reworked, but that were stuff that, encourages marriage, encourages childbirth. So, yeah, I give an ever so minor bump to manpower. Because the reason it's so minor is because this is happening in 36, 38. That isn't going to give us any more manpower for 1945. And yes, because of the ability of one person to take care of more than one child at a time, daycare as it were, it doesn't necessarily take away from man or woman power on the home front having more children, but it doesn't really help. But it sort of needs to have an effect, because I learned from feedback is events need to have, even if it's just a super minor effect, need to have an effect, and not just trivia, as it were, in the game. Just having information or immersion for immersion's sake needs to have a thing. So I would give 0.2 or 2 manpower addition, or just stuff that is immaterial in the long run, but is things that would have a post-war, did have a post-war impact, and that the Nazis, and I did know that the Nazis were planning on a war, and knowing that they're going to have casualties, and they talk about this stuff in the war, and this is sort of a replacement plan, including the idea of the soldiers, particularly the SS soldiers I'm thinking of at the moment, is that if they have children with, they're encouraged to have wives, and they're encouraged to have children with other women as well. The Lebensborn program, I'm sure you've all heard of it. Encouraged to have the right type of children, and this is always the right type of children. Got to understand that. It's not just bodies of any type, it's the right type. Encouraged to have that so that even though they may die in the upcoming or continuing once the war is going, their blood, as is part of blood and soil, will be preserved for the next generations. This is National Socialism, as I've come to understand it more and more, is very much a death cult. That is why Hitler and Himmler and others really liked the death cult elements of the Japanese samurai and saw in Japan a kindred spirit. And the Nazis knew this, the fascists of Italy knew this. Japan is not fascist. Japan is not National Socialist. Not anywhere like that. But they saw this sort of similar warrior death cult. Mussolini was much more aspirational, in that, that kind of stuff in his speeches, where Hitler is achieves this death cult of within the SS and other things, and that you don't die in war. You don't die. Because, yes, of course, you get a bullet to the head and you're no longer living. But you don't die because, and this is what they talk about, and this is sort of, to die for the Fuhrer is a highly prized thing. But you don't die because your blood is living on in the next generation. So you're not, because in the idea is you're dying anyways. And of course, a person's life, or the Mona Lisa, there's only one Mona Lisa, obviously there's copies now or whatever, we have photographs, but we have this ancient one-off historical treasure, or a person. What's more valuable? Now, of course, it's really hard to say, oh, well, we're going to burn the Mona Lisa or this person dies, which do you pick? That would be a really difficult choice. But why people risk their lives, like if there was a fire, you may have heard, probably you haven't, there was the museum, the main museum of Brazil, housed in the old royal or imperial palace or whatever in Brazil, burned down, and 20 million historical artifacts, from Egyptian mummies to all kinds of things, were destroyed. Like the only thing left is some really rare and valuable meteorite that's survived crashing to Earth, and the fiery heat of that this fire wasn't, and has destroyed so much of their museum. And of course, makes me think, do countries like Brazil and like Egypt, do they deserve to have museums with irreplaceable objects? I have a very serious problem, this is why I'm very pleased, like the British Museum and whatnot. Do these countries deserve that? Well, don't those people deserve to have? Yeah, the people do, but do the countries do? Because we watch, and you can see some film footage of Egyptian restorers damaging Egyptian priceless artifacts because they're not doing it well or doing it right. I was tremendously worried over what the Muslim Brotherhood, once they got in charge of Egypt, was going to do to the priceless artifacts in Egypt. Not necessarily that they were going to come in and destroy them all, but are they going to cut budgets back? And are they going to not, because to have a museum that somehow sparks a fire in one, and it's a large complex in one part of it, and then can rush in a matter of moments through the whole of it, is irresponsible. It's just fucking irresponsible of the Brazilian government and the Brazilian people. And, oh, well, we got to feed the starving people. Fine. Go collect all that damn material and sell it, either to private collectors who are going to cherish it and put it into into proper storage, because there's lots of rich private collectors who will do that, or to other museums, or give it to like the Smithsonian or something else. Yes, even the Smithsonian could have a nuclear strike or whatever, but this wasn't a terrorist strike. This wasn't what happened in war. This is just like an electrical fire or some shit like that they didn't go in and make and do massively expensive, and yes, they're massively expensive, while there are people starving in Brazil. I know that. But fire breaks, so that if it breaks out in one section, it burns down that section, and that stuff is irrevocably lost. True, but the 80% of the rest of the museum isn't irrevocably lost. No, they don't do this because they don't have the money. That's what I was very much worried, because the Muslim Brotherhood was not, because the only reason, in my opinion, the Egyptian government gives a crap about ancient Egypt is for tourism. Because it's not their culture, it is not their people. They are Arabs. The people of ancient Egypt were not Arabs. The people of ancient Egypt, and most all this stuff, glorifies gods which are heretical to Islam. Yes, Christians, early Christians particularly, defaced and destroyed a lot of stuff in Egypt, including possibly a later iteration, because we don't know really how much may have burned with Caesar's various siege elements, or actually more being besieged in Alexandria, and that library was burnt to some degree, but then there was a later destruction of another version. Don't know, but yes, Christians in their sort of wacky early racing of other religions did deface, especially when they moved into some, ancient temples to use the building for Christian. They went and chiseled off at least the heads of the image of the gods, and chiseled in Christian artwork. So I blame those Christians for doing bad things too. I'm not just blaming somebody else because they're different than me. But modern day Egypt, and because it's no one's pure race, and I'm not talking anything about that, but I'm talking about cultural heritage, and we definitely know that there is a massive influx of Arabs. I don't know the percent of, I don't know if anyone's done, 23andMe studies in Egypt to find out how racially is it Arab versus how racially is it ancient Egyptian, which is different. But I know the Copts, which is sort of a word for Egypt, the Coptic Christians are more the inheritors of the ancient Egyptian culture than the Arabs that live there. The only reason that they put so effort, not that most of the Egyptian government under Nasser, or go back to for King Farouk, or these, don't have any sort of appreciation for the ancient history. Even like under King Farouk, it wasn't that appreciative. It was, okay, you British get to do your thing. And Nasser and his socialist views, secularist views, they see it as tourist money. Well, the Muslim Brotherhood, by all of their actions continuing, was not concerned about the idea that tourism was going to stop coming into Egypt. In fact, I think they would have liked it. So I was very worried. Not that they were, like I say, going to, that maybe some radical cleric or radical element may storm into some museum and torch it. Not necessarily the main government, but that may happen. And, or, some radical terrorist type, extremists, and that could still, of course, happen. But just that they would neglect funding and, maintenance of the fire suppression systems and whatever it may be, that you would have this kind of thing. So I don't know that, I know I have audiences, and actually a fair amount of audiences in Brazil, and probably they're heartbroken over this, because people who watch this channel are probably interested in history. And I would love to hear somebody from Brazil, not whether they think it's a horrible thing, I'm sure they do, but whether, really looking back on it in hindsight, should they have had possession of it, because We've seen a long tradition going back quite a ways of mismanaged government. And so this could be said of Chile, of Argentina, of other South American countries. And I'm, definitely talked to a few of you on the, the comments below. And I don't want to deprive people of their cultural heritage. That is not what I want to do. But I know if the U.S. or somebody to show up with a big bucket full of cash, to renovate your museum, 80-90% of it gets siphoned off as corruption at maybe hundreds of levels, but often a little bit gets done, and that's it. And if America tries to come in, or some foreign company comes in, they're going to be tooled for some payments. And, well, this isn't ours, and, somebody will be outraged because they didn't get their corruption payment, or their company of security, whatever, should have been done instead of the American company come in, so they'll cause a furor over it to get the contract. And so you won't, in a practical sense, let, say, American museum imperialism to show up. Not with troops, but with, we're taking over your museum. It's a nice historical building. Okay, we're going to strip out that building. We're going to redo all the wiring. We're going to build fire breaks in it with special closing doors. And we're going to do all this stuff. And we're going to be running your museum for you people in Brazil. Brazil is going to go, hell no. But this is what happens. And yes, it can happen in the most advanced country in the world too. But this, in my opinion, was not a criminal act on an individual, but a criminal act upon by the society of Brazil to allow the situation. And I'm not talking about the poor person on the street who's just trying to survive in Brazil, but what middle class is on it. Middle class in there, if you were to have, before this happened, they probably just presumed that everything was be done appropriately, because they just had trust in their government. But you have that happening. Okay, so back to this, and I know this is end up not being a lot of stuff. So you have National Socialist reaction to all of the deaths in World War I, and wanting to specifically do about everything they can to increase the birth rate by the right type of people. And whenever I might want to say something positive about National Socialist Germany and the positive good they did, it would be sort of like saying, yes, they built great highways, but if you didn't have a license to drive on that highway, you didn't get the benefit of that highway. And it's denied to you if you're a communist. Now, of course, I hate communists, but I don't think they should. I think they should be allowed to drive on the highway. I hate their guts. And if they do a criminal act as an individual, whether it's beat somebody up at an Antifa rally, throw a stone at an Antifa rally, through a window or at a person, I think they should be charged, and I think they should be, in jail for as long as the crime of, whether it's 1 hour, 1 month, or 1 year, normal for, penalty for throwing a rock through a window. I think that person should be charged and get the full extent of the law against them, even more so because they're a communist, but the full extent of the law for their individual act of vandalism, or throwing it at a police officer and hurting a police officer. It's assault against a police officer and a person and whatever. But just because they're a communist, I think they should be allowed to drive on the roads. Or if you're, do you think a Jew is going to get a driver's license in Germany? Really? You see, so you may have great roads, and people have lots of cars, but Jews are going to be excluded, or gypsies, or Poles, or pick your group of unwanted people, are going to be excluded. So it's maybe very, very good for the right type of people, including, like I say, communists, or, who may genetically be the right type of people, but who have, whether they're socialists or, whatever it is, people that aren't getting on with, and eventually it gets down to more or less people who are not getting with the National Socialist program. So if you're a rampant capitalist, You're not going to get along, because National Socialism is not capitalism. Yes, capitalists, people who have capital and use capital to build things and have factories, are involved in it, but it's sort of state capitalism. It's state managed. It's not laissez-faire capitalist. If you're an entrepreneur and who wants to do your own thing and, whatever, the penalties aren't the same as if you're a communist, but you're not with the National Socialist program. And Hitler, and we've talked about it in the German series, is much more gentle with the average German who isn't in the, as they're slowly implementing National Socialism at every level of society. And I do mean slowly. Whenever they get pushed back against it from the right type of people, they stop pushing for a while. They want to do it gradual. Not if you're, again, the really bad, the Jew or the whatever. But if you're just sort of like, you're sort of a, liberal kind of guy, not a socialist, but just sort of, we want democracy and we want multi-party system and we want that, and we're sort of capitalism, sort of like a American Republican. Oh, you're not, they're not coming and beating you up with clubs most of the time. But if there's enough of you pushing back against the system, well, they'll slow up. But eventually, ultimately, you have to be the right type of person, and part of that is getting on board with the National Socialist system, not just being a German or whatever else. So again, I have to say that, and I mean that as a core element of National Socialism. For all the good that they're doing, it is just for the right type of people. So the deaths in World War I is part of that, but also we see the deaths in World War I in France as part of, I'm looking at it not just as a reaction. And again, I always known, they talk about, particularly in Britain and France, the lost generation, that was lost in the war, as well as, lost as in dead or badly maimed and whatnot, but also the lost generation as some of the artists and others, Americans often, living in Paris, in that they're, shall we say, traumatized by the war. And not that they're sitting in some mental institution and are like they had the shakes all their lives, which some of them did that, but also just the idea that they're not able to have a normal family life. They're not able to settle down to a normal sort of existence as before, is the trauma of the war. And so, which looks like a really riotous, fun party going on in Paris right now in 1938. It really does. And we could go into Josephine Baker and all this stuff, and I've studied some of this stuff, like the riotous fun party, which is, I've also been thinking about this in Berlin as a, and I always known that was a post-war reaction, but it's also the reaction to the populations and deaths and stuff in France as that. And I'm really thinking, and it still reverberates both of the reactions, because it happens again in World War II. More so in Germany. I think there's a lot more deaths as a percentage of the population in Germany because of the war than in France, because France is briefly involved in the fighting, and then occupied. I think a great majority of the French prisoners of war end up going home after the war. I think, the ones that get into prison. Now, of course, people get diseases, you get infected, they don't have penicillin, you die, but they could have gotten that same disease, an infection or whatever, working in a factory, in France, So you definitely obviously have deaths in prisoners of war camps, and not because of the, that you're there or whatever. Where I think of some of the large prisoners of war groups that the Germans capture moving into the Soviet Union, about 2/3 of them end up dying at some stage. Some of them fairly early, because they capture huge amounts of prisoners and they have no food for them, because the Soviet supply system obviously can't supply them, because it's been destroyed, disrupted, and the Germans are moving east, and the Germans didn't realize we needed to bring 1 million food for 1 million people for a month along with us. We barely have enough food for ourselves, so that there is some of that initial stuff I don't blame on the Germans as being bad captors, because, just it's the situation that they weren't expecting, and even if they were sort of expecting, really didn't have the ability to deal with it. But then a lot of them are dying in slave labor camps from malnutrition and beatings and executions and all kinds of crap. So, a lot of it is also bad treatment. And the Eastern prisoners are treated so much worse than the Western prisoners. So France doesn't have, and then of course you have the, landing in Normandy and coming across here. But I don't think that tears up a lot of French people. And then of course you have some fighting down here. But I think by and large, and I'm sure, the war puts, probably people aren't having as many children during the period just because, you don't want to have children in the midst of a, food rationing and other sorts of things. So I'm sure it does affect France's post-war situation, probably more so just because of the shock of being conquered than war deaths. But Germany obviously gets, fire bombings, so it's now reaching into more the civil population than it did in World War One, and all the deaths in the war. So that's an effect, and I'm going to be thinking a bit more that which didn't happen in China or Japan for World War One. Now, of course, China, we do have other things going on. China's population at this time and sometime before is fairly big. I want to say that. But really, it's sort of gotten bigger and since then. And because there's never been good earlier census data of just how big the population is. And I don't know if we'll ever really sort of figure it out. But, and there's various things in Japan keeping the populations down too. But, and then, because I am thinking as I'm sitting here, the 1920s particularly is a time of civil war in China. But my impressions is, there's, I don't know if you've seen them, Osprey Publishing's Men at Arms series, little white books that are like 48 pages long on subjects. And I've read all of those on China in this period and such like that, and a few other works, including the biography of Stilwell, and he was in China as a U.S. Military attaché in at least some of that period, well before the war, because Stilwell spoke Chinese. That's one of the reasons why he was a very good American general, I do believe, better than most people know, and he ends up being stuck sort of in this part of the world in what was mostly at least in the fighting sense, mostly a British front or a Commonwealth front, and fighting a very small American contingent, doing it very well, and sort of stuck in there, even though he doesn't like Chiang Kai-shek, and Chiang Kai-shek doesn't like him, but he speaks Chinese. One of the few American generals that speak Chinese. So that, I'm sure, influences. Because before getting involved in all this, he was, and you even see him in the movie 1941, acting sort of weird and vague. He wasn't, well, I don't know if, that John Belushi and other sort of great comedy. And it's sort of, it's apocryphal, but it sort of is what was in a vastly exaggerated way. But they did have Zoot Suit riots and other things that used to be a thing in LA. And though we didn't do race riots, really. I wouldn't call the Zoot Suit riots race riots. But yeah, I'm thinking about elements of the movie. It's sort of taking what was really sort of going on and making it comical and expanding it way out beyond what it was, especially as in a 24-hour period. It's that sort of like a 3 to 6 month period that happened, and not as extreme. There wasn't John Belushi or somebody like him flying around shooting at things. There was air raid scares and maybe some anti-aircraft guns going off shooting at nothing, or just at some perceived airplane or whatnot. There were little bits of that, but Stilwell was at the start of the war, but I think more up in I think that's where he was stationed or something like that. But Stilwell starts the war basically in charge of the army in California, the U.S. Army, and he's highly respected by people like Eisenhower and other generals that had served with him, mostly in a, I was saying civil, but in a peacetime capacity in the U.S. Army. Highly respected, but ends up being in sort of trapped in this theater, one in which there really isn't much for him to do and to shine. And so he's outshone. I think, I don't know because he didn't have the chance to shine, but I think he was of the caliber of MacArthur or somebody else as a military leader. He gets stuck there and not. So if MacArthur doesn't, if MacArthur defied his orders to retreat and, get out of here, and he would have had he really, trust me, MacArthur knows who Chinese Gordon is, the guy who ends up dying in Khartoum. But he knows who Chinese Gordon is. And MacArthur, at least at first, is trying to sort of play a Chinese Gordon situation here, in that, well, I'm here, the army's here, I'm going to stay here, and which is going to force the U.S. to come and rescue us. Well, he gets ordered out, and it's partially because he's ordered out, but that's sort of a face-saving thing, I think, for him, because otherwise he probably would have had to save his face and stay. But I think he realizes that the U.S. just can't, not won't, not that the U.S. isn't willing to take the cost of, sending, the carriers, escorting some, troop ships to, relieve here and take the losses that it would take, but relieve it anyways. He realizes they can't. And even if they bash their way through with something, it isn't going to be anywhere near enough to hold out. Hold out an extra week, a month, 2 months, yeah, maybe, but there isn't going to, because there just isn't the fleet, the shipping, the whatever, to get, to then 2 months later have another one show up, like as in a Malta relief convoy. He realizes it, so he gets out. But had he not been ordered out, had he not been able to get out, because he gets out down to here in a PT boat, and then is flown, because he refuses to go out in a submarine because he doesn't want to look like he's sneaking out. And unlike some of the reports of the time with the people, he gets out with his wife and his child and their one servant. He has some staff members, and there's also the president of the Philippines with him. But everybody gets to bring on one basic suitcase with him. They're not, because there's like some stories that he and some of these other people were bringing out all of his prized possessions and his raided Filipino treasury or crown jewel equivalents or what. No, it's just they comes out, everybody has their one suitcase that's coming out onto the motor torpedo boats to get out. It's no baggage beyond that. And you got to realize these guys don't have backpacks. These guys, MacArthur, not that they couldn't have gotten them, but they don't have the soldier's backpack to have a change of underwear or whatever. Don't know what they have in them. It's whatever possessions that they can put in them. Could be something valuable. I'm sure if they had a valuable thing, they would have stuck it in there, a small personal valuable thing. But it's clothing, it's whatever, and it's only one, suitcase equivalent worth to get out by motor torpedo boat and then flown out from here to wherever that he gets out. But had the motor torpedo boats engines coughed out and failed, had the plane been shot down, he very well could have been killed. I do think then would have a much more likelihood of Stilwell, because he was, again, I say, so highly respected amongst a lot of the generals at the time. They probably would have pushed for Stilwell to be in charge of the American effort in this part of the world, and I think he would have done an excellent job. I highly rate him on this stuff. I may be all wrong about it, because part of it is, because I've read a little bit about him, obviously at least one biography of him, and the biographer liked him, of course, but still you also get this sort of the idea that what other people, generals at the time, thought and respected about him So since you have that, I'm sort of going by that as well. But again, it's speculation because we don't know. Because he didn't do that. And so that's all it can be because he didn't do it. And that's my impression. So I know this was a lot of talking and rambling and talking about manpower and the effects on national psyches and things like that. Hope it was interesting. See you next time for more Hearts of Iron.